Welcome to Now We're Getting Somewhere. I'm Katie, and I'm a certified life coach, but I've also been a management consultant at McKinsey and a product manager at a tech startup. In other words, I know what it feels like to have a life that looks pretty good on paper, but doesn't feel as good as I want it to. I help my professional clients develop lives that are more meaningful, happy, and also more successful. And I want to share the same practical insights with you. Let's go. Everybody. Today, I am doing another episode where I'm going to be answering a question from a newsletter subscriber. And this week's question is from Emily. Emily's high-level question is, how do I get my ego out of the way when approaching a career transition? And then she gives these details. I'm currently an expat spouse who has a law degree and has worked as a lawyer for 20 years, but never really loved being a lawyer, but is not now because I'm in a place where those credentials don't transfer easily. As such, part of my identity has always been lawyer and also person with advanced degree. And as you might imagine, almost all of my friends and colleagues are people with advanced degrees and high-powered jobs. I generally feel good about wanting to do something different, but I struggle with my ego and a fear of not having a title or a job that clearly signals I am smart and accomplished. Having spent a lot of time meeting external societal expectations in school and professionally, I'm kind of mourning that credibility shortcut that saying I'm a lawyer provides. It's very much a two things are true situation. I know my worth isn't dependent on my career, title, degree, but also my ego wants people to know that I am smart and have that degree. Lol, she says. Okay, so Emily, the first thing I want to say to you is thank you so much for your question. I think that so many of us, and I know so many of the folks who follow my work in particular, so many people are going to relate to this, of this kind of pull and push between wanting to do something that feels right and feeling good about that on some level, and also kind of all of the ego-y stuff that can also really cause us a lot of pain. I know that I have definitely felt this way before. So the first thing I want to say. The second thing that I want to say is, if I am being 100% honest, when I first went over all the questions that I received and I saw this question from you, I thought to myself, you know what? I shouldn't answer this question. Because as I said, I have totally felt this way before, especially in my first few years of being a coach. And if I'm being 100% authentic, I never quite got my ego out of the way 100% during that time. That was just not a thing that I did. So when I read your question, I thought, maybe somebody who did 100% get their ego out of the way, just like whoosh, swoop, swept it to the side. Maybe somebody like that should answer a question like this. But then it kept kind of poking at me, because if I had a client who came to me and said, okay, Katie, please use your amazing coaching skills to help me sweep my ego to the side so I can proceed down my chosen path without insecurity or anxiety. And I know you didn't say that so, dramatically, Emily, but you did ask, how do I get my ego out of the way here? If I had a client who asked me to help them do that, I would say, I totally get that would be a thing that you would want. That's so understandable to want. But also, you may not get that 100%. And then I would still continue to give them a bunch of other useful ideas based on both my personal experiences and my coaching toolkit, but we would never really expect for it to be totally gone. And again, look, maybe there is someone else in the world who can teach you how to get it 100% gone, but as we have established, that person is not me. So I think I can still give you some ideas that will give you a lot of relief and a lot of space to move forward on what's right to you. So that is what I'm going to do today from this place of honesty and authenticity about my own experience here. So today I want to do three things. First, I want to talk to you about thoughts, a bit more conceptually. And I want to make an argument about what I think is actually painful when we say that we mourn not having a credibility shortcut, like I am a lawyer to tell people anymore. So that's the first thing. The second thing I want to do is share 4 thoughts that I recommend thinking instead when you are mourning giving up a credibility shortcut like this. These are short thoughts that have personally resonated with me and helped me. And they're also some thoughts that have really worked with a couple of clients of mine during times like this. And then third, I'm going to give some sort of very brief ideas about how to more concretely put some of these new thoughts into practice. Along the way, I'm going to share some personal stories, a few client stories, and my hope is that it's all useful and supportive to you, Emily, and to anyone else who I'm sure is struggling with this, because I know so many of us are. Okay, so as I said, before we get to some potential thoughts for you, I want to make a high-level point about what I think is actually causing us pain. When we say things like, my ego is in the way, or I have a fear of not having a job that clearly signals I'm smart and accomplished, or when we say, I am mourning the credibility shortcut that saying I am a lawyer provides. Fundamentally, I don't think the problem is actually that other people may not believe or have a shortcut to believing that you're fancy or impressive anymore. I actually think the problem is that you don't really think you're fancy or impressive anymore without that. So I don't really think it's their thoughts about you. I think it's more your thoughts about you. And I'm going to give up sort of two personal stories here to illustrate that. So for those of you who don't know my story as much, in my young adult life, I did have a certain number of kind of these credibility shortcuts. I went to Princeton, I worked at McKinsey, which is this kind of very fancy management consulting firm. And in some ways, I think I didn't think about my credibility shortcuts as much in a certain way until I lost them. But then that first bit of time when I had a coaching practice and I was trying to be a coach and again, trying to build my coaching practice, man, I did mourn the loss of kind of instantly letting people know just by my job or just by my university that I was kind of like a smart person who was together in her life. Because in my experience in the world, there were some differences. I would go to the dentist and the dentist would make conversation and ask what I did for a living. And I would tell them I was a life coach. And they would kind of like look at me in a way that felt different from when I said that I was like a Princeton student or a consultant at McKinsey. They look at me like, that's cute. Or like, that's like maybe a little sketchy. And it's funny. I tell that first story because now I want to tell you the second story, which is that maybe 2 years ago, I was talking to a partner of someone in my extended family. It was someone who was in kind of like a fairly new, but also fairly serious relationship with this family member. I didn't know this person. He was a man very well, but he was super nice. I really liked him. He liked me. We were chatting about a bunch of things. And he said to me, "Oh, you're a life coach, right? So do you make any money from doing that?" Like super casually. And it was very clear that he is kind of like assumed that I wasn't making any money at being a life coach. So clearly nothing about me being a life coach was in any way a credibility shortcut to this guy. And there was a time when a comment like that, I would have felt kind of embarrassed. I would have definitely not felt good. But this time when it was very clear to me that he thought my business was just like a sweet hobby or something. My thought was like, oh, that's so funny. He's so mistaken. Like I wasn't hurt or offended. I was just like, oh yeah, he doesn't get it. And I told him very casually, very neutrally, I was like, oh yeah, I do make money. I actually basically make as much money as my husband. And my husband, who he knew, is a professional and has like a corporate job. And I had that reaction to him, which was not at all ashamed or embarrassed, because I have a new thought about me at this point. My thought about me and my profession is I have my dream job and it's incredibly meaningful to me. It's fun. It's creative. I have full control over my business and I get to make a professional living. I mean, that's insane. What a time to be alive. And I tell this story because other people didn't change. My profession, at least some of the time, still does not provide me with credibility shortcuts. People still sometimes assume that it's a little weird or maybe it's just a hobby. Other people, at least some of the time, have exactly the same thoughts that they had about me a decade ago when I started coaching. But now, instead of embarrassment, I feel pretty neutral. Or honestly, I think it's kind of funny sometimes. I just think they're, missing information about how amazing my job is. So other people never change their thoughts, but I change my thoughts. And of course, I'm going to acknowledge that there can be a bit of like a virtuous cycle to that. I'm sure as I have come to have a bit of a new thought about my profession and sort of my competence in my own profession, I'm sure I do come across as more confident than I used to. And I'm sure some people can sense that and they might think to themselves, oh, maybe there's more to this kind of like life coaching thing than I, might have assumed. But even that kind of like subtle virtuous cycle, it doesn't override the fact that being a life coach is still, to at least some people, whatever the opposite of a credibility shortcut. It's kind of like a flakiness shortcut or something to at least some people. Like, again, no criticism or ill will towards this man, but he kind of just like assumed that I made no money from coaching, that it was just this like cute little hobby. But again, I don't really care. If anything, I think it's kind of funny. So I just share this story to really illustrate that I think the fundamental issue is going to be your thoughts about you. So that's going to be my kind of lead into this next section of the podcast, where I want to talk about some potential thoughts for you to think about you during this time. But before we get to it, I do want to be clear. I'm not going to be suggesting that you're going to believe the same thoughts that I now have about my business. As I said, the thoughts I now have in my business are something along the lines of like, I'm a very competent professional. And in fact, my profession and my business is something that a lot of people would kill to have. That thought has taken a lot of years for me to believe, and partially my circumstances have shifted over time. I am very established in my field and in my craft now, and that just wasn't always true. So it's very, very important to me, and the reason why I say this is it's very important to me that my clients, whenever we're trying to shift their thoughts, that we cultivate believable thoughts. So if you aren't actually sort of established in whatever you're about to do next, then I'm not going to suggest that you think that thought if that's not true for you. I'm just giving this example because I think it's such a fun kind of like before and after about how nobody else needed to change. I just needed to change. But for you, I want to suggest 4 potential believable thoughts that I hope might provide some relief to you in this time of transition. To me, all the believable thoughts that I've found that worked for me and that work for my clients, they acknowledge that there can be a cost, a social cost to doing this. Like, yeah, some people may have some thoughts about you when you are no longer a lawyer. They might even be in its worst moments, like, I don't know, slightly condescending or something. And some of that is probably in your head, but also some of it probably isn't. I don't think I imagined 100% of the reactions to me being a life coach. Some of them for sure, especially when I was kind of like extra sensitive in the beginning, but I don't think all of them. So I think the thoughts that I would suggest to you would be about finding a way for all of that to exist, all the realities of life. And how can you be willing and even excited to move forward anyway? So with that in mind, here are 4 potential believable thoughts for you, all of them inspired by ones that have worked for me and a couple of clients that I'm working with or have worked with recently. So the first one that I would suggest to you is, I love my reasons. I love my reasons. I love this thought. This is a thought that I personally use for all kinds of things. I love my reasons. And for you in this moment, it might be something like, I love my reasons so much, I am willing to take the social cost. I love my reasons for leaving the law so much that I'm willing to lose that credibility shortcut. And of course, it does require that you know your reasons and that you love them. So for you, it sounds like your reason might be something like, I have spent 20 years on this career, which I never really loved, and now I want to do something more meaningful, or whatever it is. It might be something like, the dentist might not give me the exact same amount of, respect, but I still love my reasons for making this change, and I am okay with incurring some of that social cost. And I will say again, some of this might require reminding yourself of your reasons on a regular basis, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about as we sort of finish out this podcast. But that is my first proposed thought to you. I love my reasons. The second thought I would offer you is, I choose to be a seedling. I choose to be a seedling. This is a thought that I have been discussing a lot with a client of mine right now who is pivoting a bit in her career. She's going to do something that is related, but still quite different to what she has done before professionally. We've been talking about, in that process about how, in this sort of new direction that she's going in, she's not an oak tree. She is a seedling, and everything is new and hard, and her roots aren't very deep, and there isn't a lot that she can do right now. And man, everything is tricky when you're just a seedling. She is figuring out how to even just get started doing the work. She's figuring out how to ask people farther ahead on the path for guidance and ideas. She's trying to meet other folks at her level for mutual support. And perhaps unsurprisingly, her work isn't as good as the people who she really admires in this field. And all of that can be super hard and frustrating, especially because she kind of like knows that she's capable of more, but she just can't quite do it yet. So we talk a lot about how her problems are, to a great extent, seedling problems. And we talk a lot about the fact that right now she is willing to be a seedling. A seedling does not get to do what oak trees get to do. And one day she will get to be an oak tree, but not today. So that is the second thought I would offer to you. I choose to be a seedling. The third thought I would offer you is, I am staying supple. I am staying supple. I've talked about this in one of my newsletters, but when I was first trained to be a coach a long time ago now, one of my teachers then said that as you get older, they particularly said, like, when you're over 40, you have to keep doing new things if you want to stay supple, if you want to keep that sparkle in your eye. I actually think 40 as an age is kind of like, a bit of an arbitrary cutoff, but I think this teacher was pointing to this idea that as we get older and more skilled in what we do, we tend to do a lot of the same things. And it is wonderful to establish expertise and comfort in an area, but if we go too far in that direction, we can calcify a bit. We can kind of get stiff and stuck. And I offered this thought some time ago to a client of mine who is a bit later in her career than the previous client I mentioned. This client is kind of more like mid-career. She's kind of in her 40s. She was quite established and skilled in her career for many years. But over time, it just became clear that that career was no longer working for her. And she wanted to go out on her own. She wanted to start her own business. But man, was it hard to let go of all the things that being established in her previous profession provided. Obviously money, but also the credibility shortcut of it all. And this thought, I am staying supple, it seemed to really land with her. And I think part of why it landed was it gave her an upside to all of this. It's so easy to focus on what you are losing. Like, other people have credibility shortcuts, but I don't. But those other people might also be getting a little brittle doing just one thing. And you, in being forced to perhaps start again, to adjust, to learn, to be a bit more of a seedling, you will be staying flexible and supple. And I think the brain can be so focused on disadvantages that it can forget the advantages too. So that is the third thought I would offer you. I am staying supple. And the fourth thought I offer you is something that was personally the most powerful thought to me as I was kind of, as I said, giving up some credibility shortcuts in a certain season of my life. And that thought is, I want to spend the next decade getting better at this. I want to spend the next decade getting better at this. Like I said, when I was in my sort of, mid-late 20s, when I was 26, about a decade ago, I was starting my coaching business and I already felt behind in life. It sounds so funny saying that about a 26-year-old, but I really felt that way at the time because, of course, I had invested some time in other career paths and it felt like other people that I knew from those career paths, they were just catapulting forward. Well, I was just like this baby seedling doing this, maybe flaky thing. I mentioned it in the kind of like my story episode of this podcast, but a lot of the people I knew at McKinsey who quote unquote pivoted, they typically, their version of pivoting was like, I decided to go to Harvard Medical School instead of Harvard Business School. So me quitting my job to be a life coach, it wasn't really like the thing that people I knew did, shall we say. But the thought I kept repeating to myself over and over, the thought that sustained me during this time was, I'm going to get better at something over the next decade. I could be getting better at being a management consultant, or it could be getting better at being a life coach. I would rather spend the next decade getting better at being a life coach. That's where I want to spend my energy and my time. So I'll offer that thought to you too. I want to spend the next decade getting better at this. Okay. So now we've talked a little bit about sort of like what kind of thoughts need to shift. That's the first thing we did. And second, I suggested some potential new thoughts for you. And then the third thing I want to do before we finish up is just talk about how to work with some of these new thoughts. So first of all, it might just be that hearing them suggested by me helps something kind of click inside of you. That happens a lot for my clients, in which case, great. Or maybe you're just going to kind of like keep them in mind and you'll repeat them to yourself sometimes when you need them. That might be all that you need. Amazing. But there are other situations where I find that my clients, that just does not do the trick. They'll be like, yeah, that new thought sounds great, Katie, but I'm still totally plagued by these insecure thoughts. So when that happens, I wanted to share a very brief overview of what I suggest to my clients. I'm probably going to do a full podcast on just this topic at some point, but just to give an overview here. You're going to want to do some more systematic work on your thinking over a period of time. So I'm going to suggest a practice here to you, but you're going to want to do it, every day for like a week or 2 weeks or something like that if you want to see some more sort of shifting in a meaningful way in your thoughts. Okay, so there's two parts to this. The first one is you want to identify what your current thoughts are. So I find it helpful just to literally list your thoughts, one per line that you currently have about this issue. So say you are, for example, about to go to a dentist appointment or a birthday party or whatever, and maybe you're feeling sort of insecure. So then you would list your thoughts one per line. Like the first line might say, other people are going to think I'm not smart if I don't say I'm a lawyer. Or the second line might say, other people are going to look at me like, oh, isn't that cute if I say what I'm doing now? Whatever it is, one per line. And then after you've listed them all out, so you can see them really clearly, because it's really, really helpful to see what your brain is currently doing before you try to shift it. So that's the first insight to know. Once you've done that, then you want to take each of those thoughts one by one and systematically analyze in writing whether you think it's actually true. And if so, if you believe that it's true, what else is true? So let's give a specific example here. So let's say that you started with the thought, other people at this party are not going to think that I'm smart if I don't say that I'm a lawyer. Okay. So when you were writing, you would explore with yourself, okay, do I actually believe that that's true? And maybe you do. Like maybe it is true that you believe that people will think you're less smart. And if that's true, then you would say, okay, well, what else is true? And, probably if you really sort of sat with yourself instead of sort of just like off the cuff thought, probably what you actually believe is something more nuanced, which you sort of already acknowledged in your upfront write-in. You would acknowledge something like, yes, it's possible they might think that, but also, and this is where you could use some of the thoughts I suggested, like, I love my reasons for making this switch, or I'm willing to be a seedling right now. So you just write all that down. Like, yes, they might have those thoughts about me, but I love my reasons, and I just really want to spend the next decade growing in this area. And then you do the next thought you have. Again, is it actually true that they're going to look at me like, oh, isn't that cute if I say what I'm doing now? If it is true, what else is true? Yes, that is true, but also I'm staying supple and I like doing that or whatever. The purpose of this exercise is just to remind your brain of what you truly believe in a systematic way. My understanding of the neuroscience of all of this is that shifting thoughts is additive. So it's which I mean it's additive, it's not subtractive. So you can't kind of get rid of those negative thoughts that you have, but you can practice bringing to the top of your conscious awareness. You can practice creating sort of stronger neural connections around the thoughts that you want to be more easily accessible, and then they will be more easily accessible for your brain whenever you need them. And I will say that this is the kind of exercise that doesn't sound so sexy or so impactful, just in the description. And even just doing it one time is not going to probably change your life. But this is this kind of thing that really compounds. So one day you might notice a small jump, but if you do it for a week, you're going to notice a much more significant jump, and so on. And of course, I will also say that this kind of work is something that I do live in sessions in a much more subtle, tailored way with my one-on-one clients. I kind of get in there with my kind of laparoscopic knife on their problematic thoughts, and then I kind of subtly implant new ones. I'm kind of like a laparoscopic surgeon with thoughts, I would say. So if that's something that appeals, feel free to reach out to me potentially about working together one-on-one. But I just wanted to share that, as I said, to at least give you some ideas that are a bit practical about how to implement integrating some of these new thoughts. Okay, so we've been on a journey together, team. And as we conclude this podcast, I just want to say, on a personal note, it's now a decade later. I remember that I had that thought that I said that I clung to through it all. What do I want to spend the next decade getting better at? I am so freaking glad that I spent my last decade getting better at coaching. There was a time at the beginning of this decade when I was a 1000% a baby seedling coach. And there was another quite long time when I was like an awkward teenager coach. And now I feel like I'm decently grown up in this kind of like alternative path I've taken. I'm not fully grown up. There's a lot more ahead of me, and I'm very excited about growing into all of that. But it feels so good to not be a baby and to not be an awkward teenager. And I wouldn't have gotten here if I hadn't been willing to go through all of those phases and spend this decade getting good at something that really matters to me. I was, and I still am, willing to let other people think thoughts about me in the service of doing what feels really right to me. By the way, Emily, it's another thought that you might think. I'm willing to let other people think thoughts about me in the service of what feels right to me. So anyway, I wanted to share that personal note to conclude or to close us out. But Emily, I hope that this is helpful for you. I know it's not a foolproof 100% of the time method of getting your ego out of the way, but it is true, and it's from my heart and my personal experience and my clients' experiences, and I hope it provides you some relief on your journey. And I hope that you will check in with me a decade from now and let me know how it goes. Bye, Emily, and bye, everyone. Hope you have a great week. If you really want to change in a meaningful, lasting way, that's when you need a life coach. Every client I've worked with has had incredibly personalized reasons why they're in the tired or anxious or stuck or uninspired state they're in. Working with me can help you identify those roadblocks, which are usually blind spots that you genuinely cannot see, and implement a profoundly customized, doable plan for overcoming them. I have a very small, high-end, one-on-one coaching practice. If you'd like to be my next client, reach out at katiesiever.com. I'd love to meet you.